Okay, so we'll continue on with the topic of the representation question and to what extent some political parties manage to sustain their power and their social basis, support basis, and while others actually, some civil society groups or some new parties emerged in order to present themselves as an alternative avenues to the existing traditional parties that put an end to or actually led to significant transformation of the and reshaping of the party system in some countries, while others managed to persist and to sustain their power even after the neoliberal era. So actually, we discussed in some detail the case of Peronism in Argentina and to what extent the party and the organizational flexibility and institutional fluidity and weakness managed to or help the party in order to adapt to adjust successfully to the new environment after the implementation of the neoliberal reforms. And in Bolivia, Evo Morales and his movement and indigenous mobilization actually put an end to the traditional three parties that totally disappeared after 2005 elections. And Brazil, how the Labour Party actually played within the rules, led to some sort of transformation from within the existing system and played within the same rules of the game. So that's why it led to more institutionalization of the party system and more stabilization of the entire system. And the capacity of the existing civil society organizations or associations didn't enable them to push further for more or far-reaching redistributive demands or economic and social, radical economic and social demands. And this eventually led to some sort of political stability, but that was at the expense of the quality of the representation and the democratic governance under the rule of the Labour Party. As I mentioned last time, we are going to talk more about some other political parties that managed to recast or reorganize their relationships to social bases or electoral constituencies, and whether or not this helped them in relation to the existing social forces, to what extent this helped them to sustain and to persist over time, and actually prevented them from disappearing from the political landscape. So we will discuss in some detail Mexico and Paraguay today. With the Mexican case, as I mentioned before, Mexico had been like ruled by one dominant party system, which was like the PRI party, the Revolutionary Institutional Party, and actually it lost elections to the PAN in 2000. The PRI candidate lost to the PAN candidate in 2000 presidential elections. But actually, after this like 7 decades in power, before losing the presidential elections in 2000, the party actually the PRI managed to make this policy switch, and the presidents or the pre-affiliated presidents managed to make this policy switch without entirely destabilizing the entire system. So the party, since the late 80s, managed to adopt some kind of successful adaptation policies, or like widened the room of maneuvering for itself in order to broaden the support base and to sustain its control over power. So as I mentioned before, the party managed to implement or to make this neoliberal turn by reaching out to some business associations and offering some sort of concessions and preferential treatment to business groups in order to push for neoliberal reform without losing its popular basis. So they incorporated popular sector, including peasants and trade unions, the party managed to co-opt top leaders. So that's why they managed to demobilize social militants and precluded any the emergence of any radical demands for more improvement of wages or living conditions. So the cooptation of the top leadership in popular sector, in peasants and labor unions or confederations, that they were actually integrated into the body or the hierarchical organization of the party, enabled the party to make this a little bit smoothly, to make this policy switch and to adapt to the changing environment. So that was in addition to the very existence of efficient bureaucratic enclaves, especially in the financial sector, so that enabled the party and it's like the ruling elites to reach out to the existing bureaucrats or the existing business associations in order to have these kind of contingent alliance with them to offer like more support to pass these reforms. So when it comes to the corporatist arrangements, although like the neoliberal turn led to a decline in in the strength of these corporatist organizations inside the party, that they didn't have any say in the implementation of the new economic policies, and this connections with the business groups and business associations helped the and the ruling class, the existing ruling elites, to sustain their power throughout the 90s. It faced some social and fierce challenges, especially from rural areas in the south, especially in Chiapas, and the regime had to face armed conflict led by Zapatistas. Because of the eradication of this, the neoliberal reform affected negatively the agricultural sector. Although it benefited, the export-led industries, it affected negatively the living conditions of the peasants, and the pre-governments actually lost or neglected the agricultural sector altogether. So that's why this affected, and the eradication of this Ghidal system, as I mentioned before, and denying this kind of indigenous rights to land, and enabling a multinational corporation to invade and penetrate, the indigenous lands. This triggered resentful feelings for the part of peasants that actually started to mobilize against the pre or against the existing regime. But again, the pre proved some sort of resilience and proved its high adaptability or high capacity to adapt to the new changing circumstances. So with the rising electoral threat in 1989, as I mentioned before, what happened was internal faction within the PRI, led by the Democratic Current under the leadership of Cardenas, that eventually established a new party, the Revolutionary Democratic Party, the PRD. And it actually offered more or additional political alternative to the PAN, and it changed the existence or the breakaway faction of the PRI and the formation and the creation of the PRD changed the political competition and the political landscape by creating one more political alternative available to voters in order to actually undermine the power basis or the electoral basis of the dominant power basis of the PRI. And actually, he ran for the presidency, Cardenas, in 1989, and the PRD party actually imposed serious challenge or threat to the dominant position of the PRI. And the PRI eventually won the elections, but that was like within a context of raising fraud allegations, and that triggered nationwide mass protest against, this electoral fraud. And Salinas, the PRI candidate, reached power, and he had to deal with this legitimacy question, and he had to adopt some sort of new policies. or new techniques in order to maintain or to renew the legitimate position and to broaden the social support base for the PRI. So when Salinas reached power, the political landscape was entirely or totally different from before. So now the PRD added, changed the political competitiveness or the competitive alignments that existed in Mexico's political system. And now the PRI had to deal with the PRD and the PAN instead of previously it had like one oppositional forces. Now it had like two oppositional forces with two different ideological orientations and policy platforms. So Salinas had to reach out to some constituents in order to renew the support base of the PRI. So he had to, first with this neoliberal turn, he had to, he maintained, this close associations or close relationships with the business associations and business people, but he had to reach out to some poor areas, especially in areas that threatened its electoral dominance, in order to distribute some material benefits and to provide people with reason to perpetuate the dominant rule of the PRI. So that's why he decided to diversify the linkages or the linkage portfolio to the social basis or the social constituents by offering or distributing some public goods in some areas and strengthening the clientelistic machine or clientelistic links in some areas, especially poor areas. So in order, he actually allocated yearly more than 1% of the GDP to a social emergency and social solidarity program called Pronasol. It was like an extensive social program that distributed public goods in different areas, especially in areas that the PRI faced fierce competition, heterogeneous electoral constituencies, that the PRI faced some fierce electoral competition from the PRD and from the PAN. And it tried to provide people, to give people a stake in perpetuating its own rule. And in poor area, the party rearranged or restructured its relationship along clientelistic lines by creating new bonds and new ties with poor people in order to get their votes in subsequent elections. So it helped a lot with the renewing the legitimate basis of the PRI. And after he ended the 6-year term, citizens actually voted for Zedillo, the PRI candidate that he assumed office again in 1994. This crisis actually undermined the fiscal or imposed more serious fiscal constraints. So now Zedillo was not able to distribute the same, to allocate the same resources, to allocate the same funds for social spending. And the whole country actually was plunged into deep recession. So that's why he had to deal with the deep economic crisis and the legitimacy question as well. Now the legitimate basis of the PRI rule totally kind of eroded in 1994. So instead of compensating people for this economic shift or this economic turn, now the state didn't have enough fiscal or financial resources in order to allocate for social spending or social emergency funds. So that's why the PRI had to resort to different techniques or different political tools in order to renew its legitimacy or to keep or to maintain its political legitimacy. So Zedillo had to undertake some serious political reform measures in order to open up the political space to political oppositions, and it actually enabled or guaranteed the free and transparent elections, and the elections had to be clean in order to give the elites legitimacy to govern, or to any claim to legitimacy in the eyes of their own citizens. So he actually pushed for more serious electoral reforms with the establishment of the Electoral Institute, that actually had to oversight or to supervise the elections, how clean and how transparent the elections are, and actually the establishment of some adjudicating body, the Federal Electoral Tribunal, in order to adjudicate, any kind of disputes regarding the electoral contestations, and its members were like two-thirds of its members were actually elected. So this actually tied the hands of now the PRI didn't have like this wide room, or didn't have the ability to play with the electoral results, and it had to commit itself. Like the electoral reforms actually offered some institutional rules and institutional mechanisms that enforced elites to commit to the electoral and the legal reforms. And gradually, the PRI started to lose ground. So in under the 6-year term under Zedillo, from 1994 until 2000, when the PRI lost the presidential elections to the PAN candidate Fox. So the PRI actually lost its congressional majority. The PRI lost the majority inside Congress, and some local elections as well. It lost Mexico City to Cardenas, the candidate of the PRD. So it was quite obvious that the social basis and the legitimate basis of the PRI role started to crumble. And with the 2000 elections, Fox, the candidate of the PAN, actually reached power and put an end to this the dominance of the PRI over the Mexican politics for 7 decades. And actually, the Fox actually, after finishing his 6-year term, Calderon as well, like, continued the break, with this dominant role of the PRI, and the PRI remained out of office for 12 years, and it managed to be, or it actually made, a comeback in 2002. Citizens decided to vote the PRI back to office or to power in 2012 with Enrique Peña Nieto reaching power in 2012 and winning the presidential elections in 2012. So the question was, so the PRI remained out of office for 12 years, from 2000 till 2012 at the national level. So it totally disappeared at this national level, lost the presidency, but remained one of the main powerful political forces in the political landscape, because it retained its presence in Congress and in sub-government level as well, at the state level or at the local level. So the PRI actually retained 40% of the seats in Congress. And nearly from 2002 till 2012, after this short decline from 1997 till 2002, it managed to improve its position at the state level, and it controlled more than half, roughly more than half of the states. So this enabled the party to be one of the most resilient or adaptable authoritarian successor party. So in the literature defines this concept as the parties that actually emerged or governed under authoritarian rules. It functioned or managed to operate well under free and fair elections. And like with these kind of conditions, the PRI managed to prove its resilient and its adaptability. And like back to our like discussions about partisan identification, with people voting the party back into office, so that means that they remained affiliated or they had the same partisan identification over these 12 years. So here you have like a graph that would illustrate how like this partisan identification after like a short decline in between 2000 and 2006, the red one, the people like or citizens identified with the pre-party started, the percentage started to rise again in the second term of the PAN from 2006 until 2012, and then it declined again under Peña's rule. And with the panistas, or the people affiliated with the PAN, after this spike in the between 2000 and 2006, like the partisan identification or the support for the party started to decline after 2000, after 1 year of Calderon's rule. And with Predistas, the party started, the affiliation with the party or the support for the party started to rise slowly or steadily after 2007, and eventually the PRD with another partisan, with a coalition with another small parties, managed to reach power in 2018. So like the PRI actually managed to have strong and powerful presence in political scene, or played important role even like after losing the presidency in 2000. It remained to, or continued to play important political role at the state level and in the legislative arena. So the question is how the PRI managed to maintain or to sustain its political existence at different levels in Mexico after losing the presidency, and it proved its how successful or adaptable authoritarian successor, how adaptable as a authoritarian successor is. So we can speak of like three main reasons. So the first one regarding the state resources, or the monopoly or the control over state resources in order to fund or to finance its extensive clientelistic machines. And the second one, it's the nature of the state-society relations. So after like 7 decades in power, how like the panistas or the PAN reshaped or restructured the state-society relation, whether or not, you know, the main parameters remain the same, or they managed to change it somehow. And obviously, with the strong presence of the PAN as well, or the democratic forces as well, were responsible for maintaining the same boundaries or the same parameters of the state-society relations. They didn't change the nature of the state-society relations radically. And the third one, it's still the democratic performance, or the Democratic Party's performance in office. It's not only, as I mentioned last lecture, it's not only regarding economic performance, but also like the corruption. As Michael Cobbage mentioned, that was like magnifying condition that shaped citizens' expectations and citizens' perceptions about political parties, and led to some detachment or de-alignment with the existing political forces, or with the existing political parties. So we can speak or examine like three main factors regarding the monopoly or the control over state resources, and the state-society or the nature of the state-society relations, and again like the perception of the citizen, and most especially with regard to corruption scandals. Starting with this control over clientelistic machines. So the PRI enjoyed what the literature calls incumbency advantage. So that means by having control over state resources and state funds. So the state, the PRI actually monopolized its control over material resources in order to be used like like the bureaucratic apparatuses, public sector, this kind of local funds. So if the PRI had this control over these resources, so the political elites or mayors or like candidates, the pre-candidates would use these economic resources in order to mobilize support bases or to renew their support bases, to channel, you know, these material resources to gain some sort of support or to mobilize support or to organize support bases. So by like having control over state resources, even after being voted out of office in 2000, the PRI managed to keep a vibrant, mobilizable support base. So the PRI sustained its control over bureaucracy and public sector. So that's why it had some spaces inside the existing state apparatus to mobilize or to organize and to offer its support at these sectors, to offer their support at any time. And even the decentralization measures, and especially fiscal decentralizations that forced the national government or the federal government to transfer like 2/3 of the yearly funds to the state, it didn't actually erode the fiscal power or the fiscal authority of the PRI, because actually the PRI or like governed or controlled, had like control over, as I mentioned, nearly half of the states. So at the state level, this fiscal decentralization didn't erode, you know, the basis or the fiscal power of the PRI. It was quite the opposite, because it controlled, you know, almost half of the states. So it offered some degree of fiscal power to the pre-elites to mobilize their support, or to dole out, you know, some material benefits and to sustain their patronage network at the local levels, because they have these kind of states, they have their own they have their own bureaucrats that they needed some resources in order to distribute some material benefits or spoils to gain a high degree of support. So the PRI controlled these local resources, and it actually had a stronger presence at the local level, and in specific states, it actually never lost elections to political opposition during, you know, the 12 years of the PAN role of the or monopoly over the presidency. So between like 2002 and 2015, from 60 to 63% of the total states were totally under the control of the PRI, with their financial power, with their financial resources, with their patronage networks. So that offered like infrastructural power or electoral assets for the PRI in order to make, you know, this comeback at the national level. So it enjoyed, you know, this control over state resources that the opposition or the other democratic forces, even the PAN, didn't enjoy. So with regard to the state-society relations, or the nature between state-society relations, the PAN presidents were reluctant, or they didn't aim at transforming radically the state-society relations, because the first priority was vested in maintaining or sustaining or stabilizing the newly emerging democratic rule or democratic regime. So the inherited corporatist organizations, although their weakness, they were kept in place. So like Fox and Calderon didn't aim at transforming radically or dismantling these corporatist arrangements or organizations. So they actually bucked at undertaking these radical transformation measures, because of either they were legally or constitutionally unable, to do that, or like unwilling, they didn't have any kind of desire or willingness to disturb, the existing or the emerging democratic regime. So legally speaking or constitutionally speaking, in order to undertake any kind of significant or radical transformation, so the PAN had to secure a two-third majority in Congress. And it, of course, it lagged because of the very existence of the PRI. The PRI, as I mentioned before, controlled roughly 40% of the seats. And with, although it didn't have like the constitutional ability to pass laws or policies the PRI actually wanted to pass, but with the small coalition, with some sort of coalition with the small parties, the PRIistas managed to pass some regulations or laws that needed simple majority. So that's why when it comes to the legislative power, the executive or the president had to deal with the existence or the strong presence and the powerful presence of the PRIistas in Congress. And when it comes to rational calculations or strategic calculations of the presidents, so they didn't need to disturb the existing democratic or the existing formula that would trigger some radical response or radical challenges and resistance that would destabilize the entire system. So they preferred to maintain the status quo to introducing any kind of radical transformation measures. So and these corporatist arrangements, despite their weakness, by giving them space to thrive under the PAN's rule or the two terms, they offered like sustainable social basis or sustainable corporatist basis or infrastructure for the pre-party, for the PRI, in order to mobilize support in elections, to mobilize voters in order to reach power again in 2012. So most especially the Labor Confederation, the CMT, and the teachers, the National Confederation or Syndicate of Teachers in Mexico, and the Oil Workers Union, and of the state-owned petroleum company, and the business associations as well, like four main groups that like sustained or enabled the PRI to persist and to make its comeback to the presidency in 2012. So with the Labor Confederation, the CMT, first of all, like Fox didn't aim at disturbing or provoking the Confederation's leaders. So the PAN elites or the Fox needed workers' leaders in order to or to co-opt the same leaders to guarantee their acquiescence in order to push for their liberal economic reforms. So they needed to mitigate any kind of rising demands or for pay increase or social and economic distributive measures. And in order to do that, so they had to cultivate support or to improve their relationships to unions leaders. So that's why it turned like blind eye to any kind of corruption scandals. So they didn't pursue any kind of corruption cases in order not to provoke, the unions or to undermine, their capacity to organize strikes or to any kind of contentious or disruptive action that would preclude or prevent the party or the PAN from pushing for its liberalized and economic reform measures. So they needed, to have like a deal with their leaders, with the unions leaders, in order to stabilize, in order to push further for liberal economic policies, and to mitigate or any kind of social and economic radical social and economic demands. And it was like much more obvious with the case of the teachers' unions. It was like one of the most supporters for the priestess, and the PAN established close ties to, or enabled the syndicates to thrive, and more than that, it gave some of its members some bureaucratic positions, and they entered the state apparatuses. So they did hold some bureaucratic positions inside the state under the PAN's role. So this gave political and organizational resources to the teachers' unions to be used later at the local level in their support to organize and to mobilize supporters for the priest candidates. So it gave or it offered a lifeline and electoral assets to the PRI at the local level that enabled the party later to magnify its support, or to mobilize more supporters at the national level. And the oil workers union of the state-owned petroleum company as well, repeatedly they transferred or channeled some funds to finance campaigns of the PRI's candidates to support them financially at the local level. And some allegations actually were pursued, and the PRI was fined, but without any kind of reversal or annulling the electoral results. So with the existence of some unions with financial resources supporting the PRI candidates, this offered again sustainable electoral asset or electoral and corporatist infrastructure for the PRI candidates to make their own way to office, or to local governments first, and then that enabled them later in 2000, after 12 years out of office, to enable them again to assume the presidency. Business associations as well. As I mentioned before as well, the PRI developed some close relationships with the business people, or with the business associations, and they themselves, they benefited from the state intervention, the role of the interventionist policies and the increasing state role in the economic domain under the import substitution industrialization. So the PRI party offered some legal protections in order to shield the domestic industries from external or international competition. So they had stake in perpetuating, the PRI's role. Even with this policy switch and this policy turnaround with the implementation of market-oriented policies, so the PRI had to establish these coalitions with business people or business associations in order to privatize some public enterprises by offering some preferential treatment and enabling ownership concentration that in some sectors, as I mentioned before, specific groups or big conglomerates, they monopolized the entire industrial sector, especially or service sector, in media and telecommunication, for example. So some business groups, they owed their wealth to the PRI and its policies, so they were loyal, or they had some sort of loyalty to the PRI, and actually PAN's presidents, they were reluctant, or they didn't actually change, or they didn't have any desire to level the playing field and to undermine the power basis, or to erode, this power basis of big businessmen or big business companies that had close ties with the PRI. So it actually, this business, the PRI business associations relations remained roughly the same under PAN's role, and through this, even after the neoliberal measures, so they had some sort of what the literature calls cronyism, and having this close political connections that enabled them to have some access to credit and some state resources and some subsidies in order to accumulate or their capital, or to accumulate their wealth. So that's why they remained loyal, or they had the same close ties with the PRI. And like the existence of media companies that actually supported before the PRI and remained loyal to the PRI's candidates, despite the fact that the electoral reform actually distributed this airtime more evenly across parties, but still with the existence of some like media companies that are loyal to a particular party. So this kind of partisan biases in media coverage remained an issue. So with the existence of some media and TV stations that remained supportive of the PRI, so they controlled, what kind of message, to disseminate, what kind of frame or what kind of issues to air or to broadcast in order to even improve, the image of the priestess in front of the citizen or the audience. So when it comes to state-society relations, the nature or the main parameter remained like quite the same. And PAN's leaders, they didn't have the desire to introduce or to push for any radical transformations that would destabilize the entire political system. So, in addition to the control over state resources, especially at the local level, and this nature of a state-society relations that offered some electoral assets and like corporatist infrastructure for the priestess, voters' perceptions as well of the government performance, of the democratic government performance, or the democratic governance. So for them, although the PRI has not been immune to these corruption scandals as well, but with the PAN leaders or with the PAN committing the same corruption or being accused of the same corruption scandals, for the perception from like the point of view of the voters, it was like this democratic governance was somehow like more of the same rather than totally new, transparent, democratic governance. So and like in addition to this, the PRI had more advantages. Like if we compare the party to the panistas, it had like pre-existing support or a baseline of support in order to draw on. So that's why if actually all the political parties or like the PRI and the PAN or as a democratic party reached power through transparent and fair elections, they both like committed the same corruption scandals. So perhaps like voters would have like given this kind of pre-existing baseline of support. So the PRI had or was actually in a privileged position in comparison to the PAN. So that these factors together actually managed to make the party much more adaptable or adjustable as an authoritarian successor, and to make its way to office again in the presidential elections of 2012. So the PRI actually didn't disappear from the political landscape, despite the fact that it lost power to PAN in 2000 and in 2000 elections. Finally, with Paraguay. So unlike other cases like Fujimori in Peru or Morales in Bolivia and even Chavez in Venezuela, these political outsiders managed to campaign on anti-elitist or anti-establishment policy platform that actually entirely reshape the party system, or root and branch reshape the party system and the political dynamics in these countries. So unlike these political outsiders, in Paraguay, the Patriotic Alliance for Change under Fernando Lugo managed to reach power in 2008. And it actually put an end to a long dominant role of the Colorado Party, but it failed to reshape the entire party system. And the Colorado, alongside or along with the Liberal Party, the two traditional parties, remained one of the powerful political forces in the political landscape. And eventually they pushed for impeachment proceedings in order to remove Lugo from office in 2012, and they put an end to this short break in their political dominance. So, what happened with regard to this reshaping or reorganizing the party linkages to social constituents, and with regard to the existence or the presence or the lack of the social forces or like political forces in social society organizations that presented themselves as an alternative to the existing political establishment or the traditional political elites. So we need to examine in some detail, these two factors in order to analyze how Lugo failed to reshape the entire party system. And actually it led to the downfall of the political outsider, unlike other political outsiders that actually reshaped the political dynamics and the political landscape in Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Bolivia. So Lugo actually was known for, he was an advocate of liberation theology and his support for the poor. So he acquired, this reputation with supporting the poor over roughly 10 years before reaching power in 2008. So and it emerged, the Patriotic Alliance or some sort of opposition front emerged in 2006 in their after this kind of fierce opposition to the Colorado's president. So Fernando Lugo and some political allies and political opposition, they managed to coalesce in order to push for in order to prepare for the 2008 elections and to support, his candidacy to the presidential elections in 2008. And actually, the alliance, Lugo and his alliance, that drew together different activist networks like peasant organizations, trade unions, feminist associations, and some it called like Frente Guaso, was like the broad front that brought together different leftist parties and different leftist opposition in order to support Lugo in the presidential race in 2008. And actually, he campaigned on the same progressive platform. Like he promised to introduce land reform measures, more establishing more just social order, and to eradicate, this institutional corruption, or to eliminate corruptions that permeated, all the political institutions in Paraguay. And he managed to politicize wide segments of the society that actually supported him, but still the Patriotic Alliance, it didn't have any kind of existence inside the parliament, inside inside Congress. It gained only 2 seats. So that's why Lugo, in order to facilitate governability or the political management of his government, so he built a coalition with one of the traditional force, the Liberal Party, in order to support the political agenda or the policy program of the executive. And actually, he had to share power with the liberals that gave them like a greater latitude in decision-making process. So his vice president actually came from the Liberal Party, and he had to distribute some ministerial posts as well, to give like some ministerial posts as well to the liberals in order to facilitate, his minority government rule. And this like led to or triggered more political crisis, this kind of heterogeneity inside or between different elements inside the coalition. It led to or triggered more crisis rather than stabilize his political rule, because the vice president and the liberals actually objected or rejected to support some of the policies passed by the president, and they actually, in some cases, even against um, some decisions about ministerial like or cabinet changes or cabinet reshuffles. So the liberals actually voiced their opposition, and they mobilized some opposition against Logo in order to push for calls for his resignation several times. So that's why instead of being an asset in order to facilitate his role, it proved to be a liability. So when it comes to the linkages to social citizens or electoral constituencies, and like the presence of populist forces as an alternative avenues, or like populist organizations that offered alternative avenues, or um, had some representative functions in order to eliminate or to delegitimize the representative claims of the traditional parties. So we need to spotlight on these two factors. So the first one here, when it comes to the linkages to constituents, like the Colorados and the liberals retained their control, or actually their monopoly over state resources. So the Colorado Party, most especially, it had like extensive patronage networks in rural areas, with some local branches of the party, like they had like a strong presence in local areas, or in different local areas, that guaranteed this subordination of peasants or local communities to the existing party. So like it's predominantly agricultural system. So the most vibrant sector has been peasants and landless peasant movement. So with the existence of these local branches of the Colorado Party, they managed to de-radicalize and subordinate peasants to patrons or local bosses, or they called caudillos. So by subordinating or subsuming peasants to local patrons, they actually effectively or realistically, peasants were not able to survive without enslaving themselves to the local patrons, because they controlled everything from like the inputs needed for cultivation for peasants, to cultivate their lands, to the transportation of and marketization of their crops, and even the conditions to get agricultural credit. And they had actually to sell their products at prices fixed by the government, which was dominated by the Colorado. So and that was like it remained the same under Logo's reign. So that's why Logo didn't have access to state resources. So first of all, because of the very existence of local branches of the Colorado Party, and second of all, the again, like the pre in Mexico, the Colorado dominated or had like full control over state bureaucracy. So they used the Colorados actually used to use public offices and this kind of public employment as a source, or as an asset for a patronage, or to use them to distribute some public employment or public jobs in order to guarantee reality of civil servants. So it was very difficult. This cooptation of the civil servants precluded any possibility of creating like pockets of resistance inside state apparatuses as well. So it actually increased like barriers to political outsiders to mobilize state resources, or to have access to state financial systems or state funds in order to use to broaden their support base. So the alternative strategy of political outsiders, as they did with their emergence within the context of severe economic crisis, as it was the case in Peru, and even like a security crisis as well, with the Shining Path as a guerrilla group there. So they actually developed this populist discourse that was based on this anti-establishment and the anti-elitist, and to mobilize people, or create, this category of the people, in order to mobilize them outside of the existing institutional channels. So what happened with the Patriotic Alliance? Lugo didn't present himself as an alternative, despite the fact that repeatedly criticized the existing political elites, or traditional political elites, mainly the Colorados. But he had like an alliance with the liberal that actually undermined his like opposition credential and any kind of populist discourse back then. And he demobilized in order to stabilize his coalition and to enable himself, or to give some room of independent act for the executive. He had to demobilize social forces because he didn't have the ability, he didn't have access to state resources, and he didn't have the ability to push for radical reform programs. And he even went farther by promulgating or issuing streams of laws that criminalize the struggle of landless peasants when they revolted, or they used the same tactics of land occupations, and they used violence in order to push for their demands for land appropriation. He actually, Congress under his rule passed, this terrorist law that actually used vague language in order to qualify any kind of this contentious or disruptive behavior as kind of terrorist act. On the other side, he actually declared, the state of emergency in order to enable or to give authority to security forces to crack down on street protest or street mobilizations. So legally speaking, he didn't offer like permissible atmosphere or conditions or environment for different social forces to mobilize to push for radical demands. And he didn't, even with the lack of this access to state resources, he didn't like arrange the relationship of the Patriotic Alliance to constituents along programmatic bonds or programmatic ties, because he promised land reform and far-reaching social and economic transformation and profound institutional reforms, but effectively he was not able to do that. So like this undermined like even like these programmatic linkages to voters that did cast a vote for him in 2008. And he actually he had to maneuver, or to sometimes, he had to assert his independent act in the face of the opposition of the liberals and the Colorados by making these kind of ministerial or cabinet changes. So after it was like an incident, like the police forces actually were deployed in order to expel some peasants that occupied lands. And that was the incident that was used as a pretext to impeach Lugo. So as a way to gain some sort of support from his social basis, and at the same time not to trigger fierce resistance from the liberals as one of the partner in his own coalition. So he actually fired the Minister of Interior and the top brass of the army in order to stabilize the entire regime and to assert his autonomous or the Executive Autonomous Act. But actually this backfired, and it triggered a reaction from traditional forces that actually liberals or the Liberal Party defected and supported the Colorado Party in Congress in order to pass the impeachment motion in June 2012. And actually they managed to remove Lugo from office, and that was considered by some activist or civil society organizations as a parliamentary coup. And this actually put an end to his like short tenure in office and assured the continuity of the same traditional parties and even their control or monopoly over the political landscape in Paraguay. And in the subsequent elections, actually, the voters voted for the Colorado candidate in order to remold authoritarianism or to reassert, to emphasize their strong and powerful presence in the political landscape. And the Frente Guasó that supported Lugo before in 2008 gained only 2% in a clear or an obvious indication of this kind of partisan decline in partisan identification or de-alignment with this political discourse, that it didn't last for so long in the political landscape. Yeah, okay, so that's all for today. So next week is off because of the midterm exam, and we will continue on the one after. So we'll continue with the same issues of indigenous mobilization with a special focus on Bolivia and Ecuador. And we'll investigate in some detail, the populist model of Chavez in Venezuela and its repercussions after his disappearance from the political scene. And as well, like Colombia and the Civil War. So we are going to investigate in some detail how the traditional, or the two parties actually, or how like new partisan coalitions put an end to the existence or the dominance of the traditional two parties there. But there is one important variable here because of the Civil War and the existence of drug cartels as a pivotal political player that eroded the clientelistic machines or fragmented the clientelistic machines, unlike what happened in Mexico or Paraguay. And then eventually in the very last week, we will tackle the issue of development, capitalism and democracy. And we will focus on the leftist policies, the social and economic policies of leftist leaders when they assume power, with a special focus on Chile and Brazil, and rentier state or rentierism in Venezuela and its relationship to decline or democratic decline, and some sort of different varieties of capitalism in Latin America. Okay, so see you in a week. Bye.